Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, McMorton.
My next guest grew up in West Covina, California, where he was a CODA. That's right, a child of deaf adults. In ways both similar and very different from the movie, he paints a complex portrait of the frustration and humor of being the child of people who cannot navigate the world without you. And while the world expects you to treat them with kid gloves, you are all too aware of their many flaws. It's an enormous amount of responsibility to dump on a child. He eventually found some solace and escape smoking pot, but it also ultimately led to his incomprehensible demoralization. He is 6 months sober today and shared with me the very funny and unique journey of how he got here. Won't you please welcome Adam K.
So where are you from?
Born and raised, born in West LA.
Oh, wow.
But
LA
didn't last
kid.
too long in West
Right.
LA. Actually, strangely, I don't know if it's strangely enough, but related enough to what we'll possibly talk about today. My parents apparently got kicked out of their apartment building on Pico Robertson because of how loud they were.
Right.
And I'm sure a crying baby didn't help that mix too much either.
Right.
So, yeah.
And your parents, I mean, this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. Your parents were deaf at the time, right?
Still are. Well, one's passed away, but I assume he doesn't hear beyond the grave.
You never know.
You don't.
We don't know what happens next.
Yeah, both my parents were born deaf.
Right.
It's one of those great mysteries that I've always wanted to figure out. My father, the most common answer for a lot of deaf people, at least of their generation, was their parents had German measles while pregnant with them.
Right.
Which usually, as a side effect of that, you begat deaf kids.
How interesting. Wow. And so the noisiness was them. I mean, do they speak?
Yes. So yeah, that is something that I've definitely dealt with a lot in my life. Is my parents are, as most people might assume, deaf people are mute, which
Right.
there are multiple mute deaf people. My parents were not that. My parents were incredibly vocal, and they had those voices that were clearly affected by their deafness, and just very loud.
And would they articulate words?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they were not making.
How interesting. Like, how does a deaf person know what words sound like? I guess.
Well, I don't think they do necessarily. That's a great question, and I've asked my mom and dad this a couple different ways, and my dad would never give an actual answer. But my mom, she went to a school called Lexington School for the Deaf, or LSD,
Right.
and over at LSD they taught them how to speak, and they also are of a generation where sign language was kind of not prohibited, but not encouraged.
Right. It was like stigmatized somehow.
Yeah, like if you taught your kids sign language, they wouldn't be able to interact in the world, was the thought.
Right.
So
right.
they both became very vocal.
Huh. And they're capable of communicating verbally. Or is that
Yes and no.
Right.
They're capable of making noises that sound like English words that could be easily interpreted as English words, and they can speak to each other and they can read lips. However, my father, who was a very he was a hustler. He was
Right.
very much a hustler in many ways. He learned how to read whatever your body language was. He had played this game his entire life. He gave up on trying to actually know what you were saying, and he just tried to get the idea of who you were.
Amazing.
So,
Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say, I had many friends and girlfriends I brought home that were like, "Oh, your dad is so nice, and he understood everything I said." And I would tell them like, "No, he didn't," and they'd be like, "No, he nodded when I said." And I was like, "Yeah, because he knows." Like, but no idea.
Right. In CODA, you've seen CODA?
I've seen CODA.
Yeah. You know, the family does, they make these sort of grunting noises, but when they were communicating to you, would they use sign language or would they try to vocalize words?
We spoke. It was
Right.
a lip reading house, and there was sign language. It was kind of like a pigeon of both going
Right.
on. But sign language was really like the outside world language.
Right.
Inside the house, like maybe if you had to like discuss something, like, or I would try to control the situation because they were really loud. There was
Right.
no. My mom would do this thing where she would literally like put her hand to her mouth and say, "I'm whispering." Like she would be at this tone. I'd be like, "You're not whispering. I think you have an idea of what whispering is, but you're not doing it."
Amazing. How frustrating. How maddening
they were
and wild.
Very loud people. Yeah.
And did it affect your speech growing up? Did you learn as a kid to articulate words in the way your parents did, which was, obviously going to sound different than the normal word?
There was a combo of things. There's certainly words like I learned later on that cotton and button are not the ways that you say those two words.
Right.
Me and my little brother, I have a little brother.
Right.
We both learned very late in life that the word for the female equivalent of a wallet is not pocketbur. And I mean, I was in my early 20s calling them pocketburs. And my little brother would say that because, we would be, when we both lived at the house.
Oh, my God.
Where's mom's pocketbur? And in public, I would talk to, other women and be like, it's a nice pocketbur. And they must have been just really sweet about it and thought like, it's an interesting little way he says purse.
Oh my God, that's so funny. I mean, because we all grow up with those things. I mean, I think a lot of people like that whole notion of intents and purposes, where everyone thinks it's intensive purposes, and then at some point they realize, oh, it's all intents and purposes. But like pocketburs.
There were so many words like that. I grew up on the next major stoplight from my house was citrus, which I learned later because it was called Kittrus until I was a teenager. My dick was a penis. Like there was just so many little words that like it still kind of feels funny hearing someone say penis, like because I'm so used to hearing this specific way of saying it.
Oh, right. So, my God, that's amazing. And so you guys moved from West LA to, I guess,
to beautiful West Covina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we were in the San Gabriel Valley.
Right.
And I spent my entire childhood, teenage years up until my early 20s in West Covina.
And what were your parents doing for work?
My dad, he got himself a job working at the Southern California Gas Company as a meter repairman. Right. I think he, one of those guys that puts down a little thing and, solders and whatever else to little repair meters inside the thing. It was great. It was his first, as far as I know, big job in his lifetime. And he got it probably when he was he had me when he was 50. Just a few years before he had me. He was always doing little jobs. I know growing up, because my dad is 50, all my cousins are much older than me. And they'll talk about, back in the day, he was like a newspaper man. He would go to LA Times and load his truck up with newspapers and, throw them. That was one job he did, or some sort of like repairman, like, guy about town. But he never had a real job until then. Right. My mom, she was, I don't know what she was. She was there. Right. She didn't really work.
Right. And so then when did you when did like the sort of alcohol use begin for you?
Well, I hate saying things like, so the interesting thing is because it sounds so preset, but I promise you it's not preset. Growing up in my house, there was zero alcohol use. My mother, although deafness was the most clear handicap she had, if you knew her long enough, if you knew her for a few weeks even, you would see that she has limitations of other sorts. Right. She would treat alcohol the same way an 11-year-old would treat alcohol, where she would whisper alcohol, like she would not actually, there was no drinking. I think twice, maybe 3 times on her birthday, she got herself a peach daiquiri. And when she ordered them, she looked like she was doing such a rebellious, evil thing that she hoped no one would judge her on and look around. And, and so my idea of alcohol was that too. And my dad, like, we weren't Jewish, but, on occasion we ended up at a synagogue and they got Shabbat services and there's, you drink wine. Sure. And he would get the grape juice. Right. My dad never drank in front of me. Right. My mother treated alcohol like it was liquid heroin. Right. And so the idea of alcohol growing up was so taboo. And my great journey to illicit substances actually started with weed. Right. Because alcohol still, to this day, of course I've drank. I wouldn't be on this podcast if I hadn't drank. But weed was really brought me to my knees and brought me to my skies. I loved it. And that really started, honestly, the first day after high school. So growing up in that situation, being a CODA, and actually the movie reflects this a little bit, you have intense responsibilities. everything is on you. I remember being a child at the bank, finger spelling out stuff about mortgages. And I mean, like,
wow,
single digit age,
Yeah.
I was really,
how interesting.
I remember like, straight up, if I was in a restaurant today with my mom, the first thing I would say is, this is my mother, she's deaf. If you need to ask her anything, just ask me. And
Right.
I mean, before the person would say, hi, my name is Tammy and I'll be
Right.
your waitress. Like, I just jump into that. That's always been my role. And I've always,
And since you were a young child,
since I was, I mean, if I had to put a number on it, I'd say since I was 3.
right? Wow.
Very much so.
Yeah,
This is part
that's a
of my
lot.
story. My mother actually literally told me she had me to take care of her,
Right.
which is really bad reasons to have a child.
I've never heard that before.
But yeah,
amazing.
being in a deaf household, that was just the thing. And that
Right.
responsibility weighs upon, at least it weighed upon me in a way where it was
Sure.
like, I can't do anything wrong. There was this idea of near perfection. Not in the way where like I have to do everything and get A's on tests, but like where I can't fail them in any sort of way.
Right, because that means the mortgage doesn't get refinanced.
Exactly. Or
That's
they,
a big fucking problem.
or they can't have like a Coke with their dinner at Denny's or something. I have to make sure all these things
And
are,
do they spiral out when things are going wrong? I mean, like,
they spiral out all the time. There was
Right.
no, this is what I'm going to assume is a very unpopular idea.
right,
But if somebody goes without challenge for a long time, their way is the only way.
right,
So them arguing, I would assume all the yelling that got us moved from West LA to West Covina, a lot of that was because no one ever told them like, hey, you can't sound like this. You can't yell at the top of your lungs
Right.
because you're frustrated all the time. You've got to
Right.
find a different way to deal with your frustration. So the smallest thing, if I turn the channel, my parents' favorite like TV show was the 4:30 news. Their second favorite was the 5 o'clock news. 5:30 news after that, and so if I wanted to watch something else in our one television, area living room, and I changed it, the loudest, shrillest, I don't want to yell into these mics, but the loudest, shrillest, change that back.
right.
And it was like someone was being stabbed or they just got hit. That was always the sound level.
Right. And I guess like there's this idea that they're not aware of how disruptive it is because they're deaf.
I've challenged that a lot, but yeah, that's very possibly
Right.
I do think they understand being angry.
Right.
I do think they understand that their actions are a little more animated when they're angry.
Right.
So
I mean, I guess we all make that mistake. I mean, in my own relationships, my wife would be like, "Why are you raising your voice?" And I'm like, "I'm not raising my voice."
you don't know it until someone else points it out,
Right.
And then you get defensive about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally. But back to the thing about when I first started using, I literally the day after high school ended,
Right.
I had this friend named Joao, and Joao had some weed, and he said, "Do you want to try it?" And I mean, of course, I knew weed. I was a huge hip hop kid,
Right.
and I just knew that all my favorite rappers loved weed, so
Right.
I wanted to love weed. And I also heard it makes music sound really good, and I'm sure this is a byproduct of my.
What year are we talking here?
We're talking like '98.
Right.
I heard music just sound so much better, and I wanted to hear music better than I was already hearing it.
Right.
It didn't work the first few times, but
Sure.
eventually, fuck, music sounded great. You could curse on here, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, music sounded really wonderful. And also as a byproduct of me being the able-bodied, able-hearing kid in the house, I kind of got to do whatever I wanted in the house.
Right.
As long as I was there to serve them when they needed something,
Right.
there was not a parenting situation. There was like a cohabitation situation. Or if anything, I was probably more of the parent at most points. But so I had friends come over, and my house was the hangout house where
Right.
people would all go to my room and get high.
Get high.
Yeah.
And your parents wouldn't complain about the smell of pot wafting from your room.
And I honestly wonder if they even knew what the smell of weed
Right.
was.
Right.
But yeah, there wasn't even much of an attempt to like blow it out the window, or
Right.
take the little like laundry dryer thing and blow it through. I mean, it was just we got
Right.
high in the room,
Yeah.
listen to music, and that was heaven. That was release. That was not feeling the responsibilities of taking care of those two deaf people outside the door.
Yeah, sure. I feel like that's like a not uncommon refrain in addiction. Like, I mean, I know I went through it. Like, if I could maintain all these other things in a convincing way, then I could be free to get fucked up.
Yeah.
I mean, I think dynamic still informs a lot of my life, but I guess I just like show up more now. I'm always like, oh, when I'm finished with this, I'm just gonna like fuck off for a while. But then I'm like, oh, I still have other stuff I have to deal with.
Yeah.
And like, what were you interested in high school? I mean, was music your thing?
Oh, I was going to be the greatest rapper that
Oh, wow.
existed, and I was damn good.
Right? Wow, how
yeah.
cool!
I love the
And
fact.
did you perform?
Yes and no. There were ciphers. West Covina. It's funny. West Covina is either like the most peaceful, loving, secure place in the world, depending on who you talk to, or like the hood, depending on who you're talking to. And I guess it's a big city. It's got 100,000 plus people, so it's got sections.
Huge Asian community.
Asian community now. Growing up, it was a solid, like, huge Latino community, burgeoning Asian community, Black community, white community, and my family also. I don't know. Maybe this is the wrong way of putting it, but I thought I was so horribly individual, terminally unique, if you will.
Sure.
Because my parents basically put it in me that I wasn't white. I was Jewish.
Right.
That's not white.
And are there a lot of Jews in West Covina?
You're talking to the Jew of West Covina. Like, that's it. Like, but yeah, there was, I mean, I went to West Covina High School and there was not a single Jew there.
Wow.
I did grow up in a place where, like, oh man, being called white boy was like just the sharpest like cut, you know, because it was usually preceded by like pinchy or fucking or I'm gonna beat your ass or some version of that. So when I would tell people I'm Jewish, it was just confusing enough.
Oh, that's good.
That it got me out of like the white boy.
Give you some cover, right?
Yeah, yeah. He ain't white, he Jewish. Great. I'll be that. I'll be that for as long as I can. And yeah, so I wanted to be a rapper. I was a fairly good rapper. I had a sharp tongue.
Right.
And, started with like Yo Mama battles in junior high, which eventually evolved into like rapping. And like, that was my whole thing. And I also wanted to be like a great scholar, but the same way that Karis One was a great scholar, don't go to school because there's too many lies there.
Right.
So I stopped going to school for a real long time.
At what point?
Probably around like, 10th, 11th grade. I was still not using a single drug at this time. I was finding other ways to like try to like have some sort of control or happiness. And so I would just not go to school. I at home, the whole situation was take care of the two deaf people.
Right.
There was no worry the other way around. So I just didn't go. And my parents had a TTY, a teletype machine, and I started excusing myself.
Oh,
and eventually I didn't have to do that.
Right.
Like I just didn't go.
And did you get in trouble or no? They were just
I slipped right through those cracks and graduated with my 2.05 GPA.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think honestly it's really bad, but I'm glad.
No,
I
it's certainly an
graduated.
indictment of our school system, but good for you for slipping through somehow.
Yeah. I mean,
and you weren't smoking pot. I thought you'd started smoking pot the first day of high school, but you actually said first day after high school.
I pointed at other people. I had to be a leader. There was such responsibility on my back.
Right.
And I remember telling people, if you can't wait till you're 21 to drink, you probably shouldn't be drinking, period. I was that guy. There was, I
squeaky clean rapper.
Yeah, or not even squeaky clean, but just like, I am so much better than you. That was the thought. Like, I just had to like maintain my superiority because I just felt there was expectations on me.
Right. Yeah.
And once I started smoking weed, it was a lot easier. Like I still felt that way. I must have told so many people, stoned and not stoned, there are leaders and there are followers in the world, and you're lucky that you're hanging out with the leader.
Right. And did you, as you were starting to get high, did you shirk in your responsibilities to your family, or?
I rebelled.
Right.
I
you sort of like,
rebelled.
I've had enough of this.
Yeah, there was there was a lot of. It wasn't even said, and it's not just the parents; it's the outside world too. I remembered. I think I spoke to you about this before. Like arguing with my parents, I was at the mall once, and like this happened more than once, but it's one specific instance. Someone just went up to me, and I was signing, and it's a very animated language, and you can slap your hands a lot in doing so. And I think at the time I was asking my parents for food because I was hungry. And I don't know what they were saying, but they definitely weren't looking to give us food.
Right.
And I was angry. And like the only way I knew how to act out was to be loud or animated, because my parents were loud and animated. And people would come up to us. They would come to me specifically, the older of the kids, and be like, "You're such a rotten person. You're such a rotten kid.
Right.
Look how terrible you are to." And all they knew about these people were like, some of them were hearing and some of them weren't.
Right.
And my parents would like look at that and be like, "Yeah, that's
right.
See what people do to you if you're not, if you try to act up." And so there was just such a responsibility, and there's such anger that came with that.
Did you feel that your parents were able to provide for you?
No. I mean, There was a house.
Right.
I never thought that we were going to lose the house. That
Right.
never came to mind.
Right.
But like food was, it was provided a lot of the time,
Right.
but not all the time.
Right.
Me and my brother were definitely taught. Pops, like I said, was a hustler. He taught us to steal.
Right.
We knew that when we went to the grocery store that you didn't have to pay for sodas if you drank them in the store.
Right.
My dad always had a pack of stolen juicy fruit in his like pocket, and if we got caught, one of us, two siblings, one of us would have to tell our parents, and they would come grab us, and we were always excused. I'm sure it's because like two deaf people were there.
Right.
But yeah, they would just say, "Don't get caught next time."
Right. Yeah.
So we learned like stealing is the way, and I also where I live, like a lot of my friends stole. I grew up with like little not thugs, but like
right.
definitely
a
not
lot
the
of
most-
parents not providing for their kids,
Yeah,
and the kids are kind of scraping by and putting,
It wasn't hood, but it was like diet hood.
Right.
There was shit going on.
Yeah.
It was crack smokers in the area.
Sure. And did you go to college?
I did. So another element of all this is I really believed I was going to be like Biggie. I was going to be the rags to riches
Sure.
story, and I was going to come out this struggle. And I also wanted to be like all these intellectual rappers, and I was going to get my Black History degree. And the first school that accepted me was Grambling State University down in Louisiana. And I had several friends that went down there and told me how boring it was. And I need to go down there, and I need to get my Black History degree, and I needed to be a Black History professor. And I needed to like justify, because one of the other things I haven't mentioned is I grew up in a majority Black neighborhood.
Right.
And I needed to be accepted in a world that wasn't like this deaf world.
Right.
And yeah, so I went off to college, and that's where I discovered shrooms and other psychedelics.
Right.
And that was really nice.
Right.
My grandpa left me a little bit of money for college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went away to UNLV in Las Vegas.
Right.
And which is a horrible school to go to when you didn't look 21 until you're like 30.
I sympathize.
Yeah, you couldn't do anything out there except take drugs because drugs were available on campus.
Right.
But that was wonderful because then you have this whole community of people that are not treating you the way you're used to being treated.
Right.
You're not hanging out in like a hustler's neighborhood. You're hanging out with like, Tammy and Todd,
Right.
in the dorms, and they just want to get high and complain about whatever class.
How interesting. What a
And
different
ask you if you're
world.
pledging a frat. So it was just it was so weird.
Did you know your grandparents growing up?
Barely, because I had such senior parents myself,
right. Sure.
and they were all on the East Coast. I think part of their whole thing was they didn't know what to do with their deaf kids,
Right.
and so they had the whole immigrant story, came to America, made a little bit of money with their dry cleaning shops, and sent money to think that I was going to like take care of their kids. So no, I didn't get to know them, but they did care enough to leave some money.
That's
send me off to
amazing.
college.
I mean, what an eye-opening experience to go from, sort of scraping together burritos from the 7-Eleven to like these kids who have so much privilege and are
left me
even
angry.
unaware of it, probably.
It left me super angry. It was one of those things where like even smoking with them, I was like, they don't smoke right, they don't get high right, they don't get drunk right.
Right.
The drunk kid that would end up in your dorm room and you're like, how the fuck did you get here? I would just want to punch him.
Right.
Because how dare you do something that I wouldn't be allowed to do?
How interesting. Wow.
My restrictions on myself were so, like I said, perfection. I couldn't do anything that was wrong. And so seeing someone stumbling in the hallway pissed me off.
Right.
I also hated stoner culture, though I was so high 25 hours of the day. If I saw you with like a Bob Marley poster on your
Right.
wall, fuck you. I hated those kids. And I also felt no one could identify with me because in my head, I was this like grew up in the hood kind of guy and like no one here knows my pain and
Yeah.
that whole world.
That's amazing.
So my getting high was a lot of like, it allowed me to judge more.
Did you drink in college? No.
I drank a little bit
Right.
in college, but no, my thing was always every other substance. The only time I really drank was fast forward many years down the road. I had this girlfriend that was as much of a alcoholic addict as I am.
Right.
And we broke up, and she told all my dealers that I was a narc. And I was shit out of luck, and
Right.
that's when alcohol was like available,
Right.
and I
I'll
was
take
over
this.
21, so I went
Right.
for it. Yeah.
And were you rapping at UNLV?
I was working in a record store.
Right.
And I wasn't rapping as much as I wished I would. You know what? The world of college was so white. And I get this is a white dude with saying this,
Yeah.
but it was so white that it almost turned me off from it. In my head, I was the realest motherfucker you ever met.
Right.
You know, I was going down to like Leimert Park every Thursday night for Project Blowed when I lived out here. I would still drive out from Vegas to go down there.
Oh, wow.
And that was like the realest of the real to me. And there was a whole scene there. And then I'm hanging out with like, you know, Tad and Thad and all those cats. And they just weren't real enough for me. And I was just so angry that I, you know, the only place where I could feel okay musically was working at a record store where I became like the ultimate hip hop snob and got to like give my like thumbs up, thumbs down to like the selection you might bring up to the counter. And that was it. So yeah, I it was one of those things where I was so angry and I was going to do it and I was going to do it and I was going to do it. And that's all it was talk in my head at that point. I was just going to school and being angry and judging people and getting high.
So then what happens?
Then I eventually run out of money because Grandpa didn't give me a lot of money.
Right.
And working at a record store doesn't do enough to pay out of state college fees and all that stuff. And I run back to mom and dad's house where I become, you know, this community college, local townie, just getting high, still trying to do something with my life, but honestly, so angry and just so unable to do anything except serve the parents and be high and go to Mount Sac for my math 101 class or whatever they call it in community college. And hang out with my other stoner friends and do nothing more than that. But have dreams. Like my dreams are always there, but my ability to actually believe that, not even believe, but attempt to do anything wasn't there.
Right.
Where I grew up, there was a lot of like, you ain't shit. You ain't gonna be shit, like kind of talk.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, well, I believe I'm more than that, but I'm not going to actually act on it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just remained the stoner kid and eventually got to another 4-year and career day at that school.
Where did you go for the 4
Cal State Fullerton. Actually, let me go back a little. So a big part of this whole like lifestyle I was going through was like I was so, like I said, terminally unique. And so I go to this community college. And being a Jewish kid, I decided I'm going to join Muslim Student Association. And so I'm hanging out with all these Muslims, and it was a really weird situation.
And what's driving this choice? Curiosity? Rebellion?
I just never felt like I could be included with anything. Growing up in a deaf household, there's a lot of people making fun of you, and you are in the situation where it's just me. The kids on the outside, the neighbors on the outside. When you go to the restaurant, you see the people whispering and pointing and all that stuff. And people, when they find out you have deaf parents, their voice changes to you. You know, they go like, oh, you know, I had so many girlfriends that like they were just talking to Adam, and then they're like, tell me about your family. Like, my parents are deaf, and then it's like, oh, which is a great way to get a girl, but like you notice they don't treat you the same, and you're just like, oh, I will never be just like you. Right. I will never be accepted. And so I think I just, you know, like I said, I applied to nothing but HBCUs until I eventually went to a different school. And I joined Muslim Student Association, and I was a rapper and just read every Black history book you could read from age 15 on to whatever.
And is the Muslim thing because of Malcolm X and No.
The Muslim thing was because there was this Arab kid that was next to me in class, and I loved you know, Islam. I actually read the Quran to be difficult when I had this girl that I was dating who was going to like, Christian Sunday school. I was like, I'll read the Quran and talk about it in there. I was just, you know, horribly terminally unique in my own head. Anyway, so I hang out with these kids in Muslim Student Association. We start a film company. To make promotional videos for mosques in the San Gabriel Valley because no one else was doing it. It seemed like a great thing to do.
Here's a good untapped market.
It was me, this great guy named Murad, and this other guy who converted to Islam on 9/12. This big white dude named Paul, and we started this company. And so you basically have a burgeoning alcoholic, a total alcoholic. The kid who converted on 9/12 was that guy. We lasted like a few weeks, but fast forward, I go over to a 4-year school. There's career day. I make this whole resume where I talk about being a Jewish kid in a post 9/11 world, studying the Muslim, blah blah blah. And before I know it, I have an internship at Entertainment. And then I just focus everything on that. I stopped going to school. I end up there, and that's my whole world. That and being a stoner. At this point, college is backseat. And I remember at some
Where
point,
is E? Where are you going to
E's
work?
a Miracle Mile,
Right,
a
so you're
Wilshire,
commuting from West Covina
doing
to
a 2.5 hour trip every day and trying to be so terminally unique. I would bring scissors in the car with me and give myself a haircut every day so I would look fresh.
Wow.
And like just doing everything, you're stuck in traffic, not moving.
Yeah.
And I just remember around that time, I decided, like, it wasn't conscious, but it was like semi-conscious. I'm just going to be the cute stoner kid.
Right.
As long as I get my work done and I'm the cute stoner kid, I'll keep getting hired for jobs.
Yeah.
And that's all I cared about was like.
And what kind of work are you doing at this point?
I was PAing.
Right.
Eventually got a couple of jobs as an associate producer on like, E's 101 most ...
Yeah.
Outrageous moments of Tom Cruise or whatever those shows are called. And I just would leave the job and 2 hours in the car, I'd get high in the car, drive home, come back. I would talk about being stoned all the time. And it wasn't weird. Maybe it was weird to other people. To me, it wasn't weird. It helped me to be that much more unique.
Right.
And in a weird way, I guess it made me feel like they wouldn't give me a lot of responsibility.
Sure, because they're like, that kid's stoned all the time. But he's so sweet.
Yeah, he makes a lot of great jokes, and he knows how to get our lunch orders. So
Right.
we'll keep him at that. And so I was doing that for years.
Right.
And eventually I moved into town, and I met the girl that made my heart skip a beat, and she was a full-blown alcoholic, and that just opened up a whole new world to me. That was like the reverse of like the Wizard of Oz, where like they open the door and everything's in color. Like all of a sudden,
Right.
everything's just like looks like a death metal video. All of a sudden, it's just rough. But she partied hard,
Right.
and I couldn't believe that like me, the weirdo white boy who like fancies himself like a black Muslim, out of West Covina, has this girl, and it allowed me to like party harder.
Right.
You start getting those what they call, I guess. I feel bad saying this, but the lower companion style friends were like they're all getting wasted all day.
And was she like an entertainment person as well?
She was working retail at another
Right.
record shop, and me, with my music
Right.
world thing, was always at a record shop.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just one of those things where she introduced me to her friends. I literally, the day I moved into LA, I made some friends at work that wanted a roommate. The day I moved in was the day that I started staying with her whole lot, which means I wasn't home that much unless I brought her there.
Right.
And it was just hard partying. It went from this world where I was a cutesy stoner to this world of vomiting. I wasn't doing the vomiting. She was doing the vomiting. But this was a normal thing to see. And I thought oh, this is how the adult world lives. This
Right.
is kind of what you see in not comedies, but in dramas you see on TV.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, so this is what the outside world is. Because I was still trying to gain what the outside world was. All I really had.
Of course. I mean, I think we all go through that, but yours is more extreme.
Yeah, mine was just this deaf world, and there was no, and I don't like saying representation, but there was never a show with a kid who had deaf parents.
No.
And there was very rarely a show where there was a kid who was the white boy minority with the deaf parents, and they happen to be Jewish, and
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly
that.
your specific story.
Yeah,
nowhere.
I didn't know where to look. I guess Michael Rappaport kind of became an idol. Not that he had deaf parents, but it was the closest I could find to oh, I guess that's kind of me.
Right.
And yeah, but Michael Rappaport wasn't exactly here's how to live life. The movie Zebrahead didn't give me divine adult guidance or anything.
Yeah. God.
So yeah, that was and I just tried to party and not look weird.
Right.
Did coke for the first time and drank with her a little bit. But I was such a bitch about my drink. I just wanted to be high all the time.
Right.
I remember I would just get amaretto milkshakes, and she would just be she was hardcore. She
Right.
was.
She's what kind of pussy are you? Amaretto milkshake.
I think she just thought I was the cute stoner guy.
Right. That's hilarious.
But she also would point out to me that you get high a lot, and it was funny because she was so clearly an alcoholic,
Right.
and she would talk about how much she loved being an alcoholic, and then she would point out how much I'm getting, and that struck me as it's one of those things where I could judge her for saying what she said, but also how dare you judge me? You
Right.
You think I do a lot? Come on.
And is she still with us?
I've heard she's still alive. I don't speak with her, of course. This was
Right.
many years ago. But yeah, she's still alive. She's had some runs from what I've heard.
I bet it eventually catches up to you.
Yeah.
Inevitably.
Yeah.
And so what happens that things change?
Well, it's perfect. Like I said, I started hanging out with this girl the first day I lived in LA. I was going to Cal State Fullerton before, and I was hanging out with this girl, this Jewish girl, who for me was like a thing. Parents, stop dating all those other races. Find yourself a Jewish girl. So
Right.
I found myself a Jewish girl who was, of course, a meth addict.
Oh, nice.
And I was hanging out with her down in Fullerton, and I got, honestly, in a really shitty way, I just kind of stopped talking to her.
Right.
And about 9 months after I stopped talking to her, I'm driving to this job, this e-entertainment related job, and my car had got hit. I drove a shitty Plymouth Neon, and it got rear-ended by someone. And their insurance paid for me to have a convertible Mustang. So I thought I was the shit.
Right.
I'm working my Hollywood job. I'm doing my rags to riches, and I'm up on the riches angle. And I get this phone call, and I, pick up my phone, and it's a lady. I've been trying to contact you for a while. I just want to let you know that your child's been adopted.
Oh my God.
And just like that, like there was no indication beforehand. Nothing.
Oh my God.
Nothing. And my heart sank.
Wow.
And she told me, I don't know if this is true or not, and maybe it's been a few years, but I think it was federal law. They have to inform both parents on the birth certificate that your child's been adopted. And I remember I called up the girlfriend, and I told her, and her suggestion to me was, you need to be really high right now.
Right.
And best advice I think I would have got from anyone at that moment. I couldn't tell my parents. They weren't parents. I didn't know where to go. So getting high seemed about right. And I was working a job. I was doing something for, do you remember Pop-Up Video?
Not really.
It was a TV show with like music videos, and they had like little pop-up bubbles with fun effects. They were doing their own version of that show. This is just before TMZ came. That was basically Pop-Up Paparazzi.
Oh, fun.
And so anyways, they I fucked that job up. They let the stoner kid basically handle money. And I fucked up the budget by, I don't know if it was 25,000, 50,000, 70. It was some increment of 25,000 that I fucked the budget up by, and I got one of those like, you're never gonna work in this town again, like things. And like, my world is spiraling. I tried talking to baby mama. She's not talking to me now. And growing up with the deaf parents and being in this like role of responsibility, one of those thoughts you always have is like, when I have a kid, I'm going to be such a great parent. I'm not going to let this happen. Right. And here I was finding out, like, dealing with this girl who's got crazy drug problems, moving on to the next girl with crazy drug problems, not even seeing the connections in these things. A kid's now in the picture, and I'm not. I have no power here. Nothing. And that was also out of my thing. Like, I take care of my parents. What do you mean I don't have power? Yeah. And I was freaked the fuck out. And it took a little while, but eventually I was still hanging out with the girl, and we went to this Coke party. It wasn't a Coke party. There was a party with lots of cocaine. Right. In San Diego, and I remember driving down there. I had busted taillight. I didn't have my registration done, and she told me halfway down the road to San Diego, I got some Coke in my pocket, and I was pissed because like, if I get pulled over, anyways, we go to this party. She gets far more obliterated. It shouldn't be a comparison. I'll take it back. We both get pretty obliterated. She is having fun. She's an outgoing alcoholic. Right. I am an inward shrinking person, likes to be high and stare at the stereo speaker. Right. And she's like flirting with other men in front of me, and I'm so helpless because when I get high, I am just frozen still. I can't say anything witty. Right. And I eventually like leave. We were outside. There was like a pool and jacuzzi, and she's clearly like touching on other men. And I run inside the house or whatever, and I end up in some room, and I don't know how much time had passed, but eventually someone opens a door and like dumps her into the room. Right. And I remember she was breathing, but it was like a gurgle breathe. Right. And I was freaked out thinking, oh shit, this girl's going to die. Yeah. And I try to help her up, and she finds a way to crawl to like where there's a couch. I'm like, okay, so she's able to do that. She's fine. Right. In the morning, she wakes up. She's like, what happened? And I'm angry, and I'm on my high horse. I'm the same person at that point who like, you got to wait to drink to 21. I'm throwing this like finger waving thing down at her, and she's embarrassed about the night before, and she's going down to her friends, and they're all having mimosas, and she makes a trip up to me, and her attitude's a little different, where she's like, they said I did some stuff, but it doesn't sound that bad. And she goes back down. I'm too embarrassed to like leave the room. And eventually, like on the third trip, she's like, you're fucking tripping. You need to leave. And eventually anger's a great motivator for me, I guess. I go down to where everyone's having mimosas and they ask me if I want to drink. And I say no. And they're like, do you want anything? I was like, yeah, I want for her to stop drinking.
Right.
And it was like record scratch across. And then someone says, I think you need to leave.
Right.
So I drive up from San Diego. But just before I do, I had one friend who I knew was sober. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to that friend and she said, tell your girlfriend that you care for her and you'll talk when you get home. And I didn't want to say that. I wanted to be angry. And I told her that. Came up. 2 days later, the girl says, I think I want to get help.
Wow.
And I'm the caring boyfriend with the girl who has a problem because she drinks like a fish and she did all this stuff. And that Pop-Up Paparazzi show.
Right.
I'm going to give you a year. This was 2007, I believe. And that was a great year for paparazzi. That was...
Sure. Peak paparazzi.
Yeah, like Britney Spears shaving her head, Lindsay Lohan and Paris Hilton running amok at this job before I get fired, talking to like the paparazzi in the morning and like kind of feeling like a connection to some of these people. Like Britney Spears getting her head shaved. I knew like the paparazzi that were chasing her around. Right. So fast forward to my birthday's in late June and I'm still with the girl. She's now getting a little bit of help. She's got like a week or two of sobriety at this point. And she says, how about we go to Malibu for your birthday?
Right.
So I say, sure, that sounds great. We go out to the beach and she has her little directory because she's in her first couple weeks of sobriety. Yeah. And she says, can we go to a meeting? And I was like, I'm going to be such a great boyfriend here. I'm going to take her to a meeting and like fucking points, you know?
Right.
We go to this meeting. My girlfriend raises her hand as a newcomer and she gets so much love and support. And me, I come from this world where like, you know, to fast forward it all and bring it back to where it originally was. If I said anything to my parents, people would come up and scold me, you know? Right. And so she's in this room talking about she has an alcohol problem. And as people are saying, it's going to be okay. And I'm just looking, I'm like, oh my God, everyone in this room is on the same level.
How interesting.
And I was just wowed. And there was this like little, you know, halftime meeting break. And I turned to Mel and I say, your name's Mel, right?
Good for you.
And I'm, you know, and if I haven't said it enough during this thing, I identify pretty Jewishly.
Right.
And I say to him, I heard you've had some problem with the Jews. And I just want to let you know, you're forgiven. And you know, the look on his face is not one I'll ever forget, but he said, thank you. I don't know if his face didn't say thank you, but he said, thank you. And my girlfriend said to me,
what did his face say? Did his face say, go fuck yourself? Or was it more like,
his face was like,
what?
how dare you little fucking punk kid, like come to me and say that you forgive me on behalf of Jews everywhere. You know, he's got his like,
but he's so in trouble at that point.
Yeah,
he's just like, thank you.
He's doing the tour. You know, he's got to talk to rabbis in front of the camera and all that stuff, and shake hands with like whoever he's shaking hands with.
That's amazing.
You know, that night she actually had a surprise party planned for me back in my house, and so my friends were at my house, and they gave me a surprise party. Honestly, one of the nicest things I think people had done for me at that point.
Yeah, sure.
But and this is not that I even realized at the moment, but looking back, I knew that night I was going to get high.
Right.
And I couldn't get high with my newly sober girlfriend.
Right.
So I sent her home. About a week later, we broke up.
Right.
It was curtains. We had a fight, and that was it. Anyways, I didn't have the job anymore. This whole rags to riches story was going right back to rags. There's this kid that I'm just trying to like get high enough to not like really think about too much. I lost the girl. That summer was just shit.
Right.
I remember I started reading the diary of Anne Frank, and you know, in the diary, she's like, that's her best friend. I had no friends. I wasn't talking to anybody. So my little Dear Kitty diary was like my friend. And there was this night in September where I was trying to hook up with this girl, and I wrote in this thing, and I was at the Red Lion bar at the Bank of America parking lot, crying, trying to like maintain so I could look cool and like score with this girl. And I'm writing in my Dear Kitty thing, I think I'm gonna kill myself. Life is shit, blah blah blah. Fold it up, throw it in the back seat, clear my face, go out there, try to flirt with this girl. Didn't work. Next day, I make it home, and I was drunk. That was definitely one night that I drove home drunk.
Right.
And Mr. You can't do anything till you're 21 is now realizing he's driving home drunk.
Yeah.
The next morning I wake up, and I lived in Highland Park at the time, and I knew where the gold line was, and I was thinking, I'm just going to jump in front of the gold line.
Right.
I got a text from a friend that was just a random text that I was like, this is a sign. And I was also too chicken shit to like jump in front of the goal line at that moment.
That's a lot.
And that summer when I was just...
Did you actually get all the way to the goal line?
No, the goal line was like 2 stoplights away. It wasn't that hard.
Right.
But I told myself, like, you got no reason to live.
Yeah.
You got to go, kid. And that summer when I was spiraling out, I have this half sister that lived in Hollywood off Hancock Park, beautiful house.
Right.
And she had this real bohemian grandmother. Mm-hmm. Like Bobby Fischer used to go to that house when he was a kid, and real intellectual type place. And I always like looked up to people there. And
Sure.
So I'm at the house one day during this like spiral summer, and there's this random guy swimming in the pool that I've never seen before. I ask him his name. He's like, I've been here I've lived here for the last couple of years. Like, you've lived here? I've never noticed you at grandma's house. And turns out it was one of my big brother's friends. I had a half big brother too. And he was a recovering heroin addict.
Oh, right.
And I guess he thought enough of how I was talking and how I was acting to be like, let me get your number.
Right.
And, we exchanged numbers. And this day where I was looking to jump in front of the goal line, because I was too chicken shit and I couldn't think of any other soft way to kill myself, I just reached out to this guy.
Right.
And he took me. He was my Eskimo.
What'd you say to him?
I think I just said I need help.
Right.
I mean, I don't even remember the exacts,
Right.
but I mean, I could have said like, "Hey, everything's great," but my voice was just there was
So
nothing.
obvious,
Yeah. And he took me. He took me to a meeting, and I could tell he had never Eskimoed anyone, so he was pretty awkward.
Right.
He was just this guy who was on heroin, wasn't on heroin anymore, found a way to stay off heroin, and dragged me along to something. And then I got one of those little books that my girlfriend had, and I went to I went to one of these meetings. I was like a meditation meeting,
Right.
but I showed up 15 minutes late. So when I went into the room, it was dark.
Right.
I'm still shaking, like I'm both emotionally and coming off of whatever I'm coming off of. I'm still shaking. And I leave the room because everyone's in this dark room. And it was at a church. There was another room, and there were all these guys in well-dressed suits. And they said, "Do you want to be saved?" And I was like, nah, the Jew ain't dealing with this. And I stepped out that room, and it felt weird. But I wasn't going to commit suicide. I went to another one of these meetings, and I had worked at a bunch of record stores.
Right.
And not a big shocker, record stores are great hubs for drugs.
Right.
And there was this guy who actually had one record store. I was replacing him. They were firing him because of his heroin habit. And I was and there was a little bit of like crossover between us. He was in a band too. So they were like, yeah, you go tour with your band. Your job will be, wait, no, it won't. Yeah, and I take over for him. And I always knew him as like this emaciated, like fucked up guy. And I walk into his third meeting, and there he is, and he's healthy. And I'm shaking in the corner like this. Wow. And he took me under his wing.
Right.
And he helped me a ton.
Right.
Did
you stay sober from there?
I stayed sober for years, but I wasn't doing the things. Like, there was still the anger. There was still all that stuff. And I wasn't, they tell you do steps.
Right.
My whole thing is I wanted you to like me. I wanted you, I was basically the cutesy stoner boy without like the weed.
Right.
But inside I was angry.
Yeah.
And I still had this whole like responsibility with like the family, and like even if I'm not with them, it's been implanted in me since age 0. So I just feel like a lot of bubbling anger. And I just kind of stayed, sober and miserable for many years.
Right.
I relapsed during COVID. I had never taken any weed, any drug from a weed dispensary.
Right.
And I was envious.
Sure.
I got sober just before like these places opened up.
Suddenly, like the dream came true.
Yeah, and not only that, they're like, it's not just weed, but it's like this one has special THC.
Yeah, everything
content.
does
This one
different
has
stuff.
CBD.
Yeah.
Like, if you're feeling forgetful, take this remembering weed. If you feel like you remember too much, take this forgetting weed. And like, I just said fuck it one day.
Right.
And I did it. I took edible, and honestly, it was fucking magical.
Really?
It was magical. The only issue was, after 3 days, it wasn't so magical anymore. And there I was, and I couldn't stop.
Right.
And there I am on my couch listening to music, and the music's not fun.
Right.
And watching YouTube, and there's nowhere to go. It's COVID.
Yeah.
There were like points. I remember this point. There was like, I don't know if he's passed or not, or if I just heard him on the radio, like laws where you couldn't be outside without a mask. And like all these restrictive, we don't know what's coming kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
it was intense.
Yeah. You couldn't go to the hospital without
You
like,
couldn't go in the park. Yeah, you couldn't walk on park trails without a mask. Like,
yeah.
what?
And so all there was like the weed shop. Like, sure, you had to wear a mask in there.
Yeah.
But like, you could just get your weed and go back to your home where you don't have to do anything. Like,
Yeah.
talk or
Yeah,
whatever. And I just did that. And I did that for months.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
So it was great for 3 days and then months of not so great.
Yeah. There was that wonderful flashback to like those good moments. But,
Yeah.
you know, this thing, you know, if weed was great all the time, if shrooms were great all the time, if coke was great all the time, why would anyone get sober?
Yeah.
It just got to have less and less diminishing returns, basically.
Yeah, sure.
And then it just went from like not even diminishing returns to like just pain and like, you know, it became like this fucked up muscle memory. Like, I guess I got to get high today.
Yeah.
You know, it was embarrassing. They have a $1 point plan at the weed dispensary. And it was like, you know, after you spend $1,000, you get $100 credit towards whatever. And I had crossed that threshold like a couple times in like a 4-month period. And there were like all these like cute little people behind the counter. And I never wanted them to judge me as a stoner, but they knew me by name.
Yeah.
And like, that was embarrassing. I want to be like the cool guy that you're like, oh, he's handsome and witty.
Right.
And no, I was just the stoner guy coming in, picking up my like $20 every other day, like edible bag.
Right.
And then, you know, at some point realizing I can't smoke either, because if I smoke today, then I'm not going to be able to speak as loud, and, you know, just fucking myself up left and right and not even enjoying it. Yeah.
And so how'd you break that pattern?
The deep-seated hate that one has for himself, really, I don't want to sound that witty, because I'm not that witty. I was just always angry, and like I said, I never dealt with shit beforehand, and I was good at working from home. You know, it's really easy to be stoned and working from home.
Sure.
And I had some money, and I had friends that like want to borrow money, and it made me feel superior to be able to lend them money.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this friend that I lent a couple $1,000s to, and you know, our relationship was purely based on ego. He was an influencer. I was the influencer's friend.
Right.
And after a while, I was like, why is this fucker not paying me back? And, you know, social media is a great way to vent when you can't talk to anyone.
Sure.
And I just wanted this guy to pay, not just financially, but I wanted him to be humiliated. And so I posted something about this, and he contacted me and said he was going to bring lawyers in and all this stuff. And I was thinking, I'm such the victim here. You know, I'm telling everyone how much of a deadbeat you are, and I'm such the victim here, and you're fucking up my victimhood here. And I eventually I talked to a lawyer myself, and he's like, just collect the money and leave.
Right.
And I went down to collect the money from this guy, and he had paid a few people to be there as witnesses. He was probably told to do so. And he videotaped it, and these people are talking shit to me as the guys he's paying. And I eventually pick up the money and walk out of this place, and I thought I'd feel great, and I felt like shit. And I remember I didn't get stoned that day or the day before, because I knew I was going to go in and see him, and I had to be sharp.
Right. Want your wits about you.
Yeah. And I just go in, and like, you know, nothing goes the way I hoped it would. Like I said, I get the money, I go home. About, I don't know, 2 hours later, I'm on the phone with the 988 suicide line.
Wow.
And just feeling fucking empty.
Yeah.
And people had talked to me like throughout, like me asking me, are you going to go back to me? You know, are you going to get sober again? And I have this therapist who he's sober, and he was suggesting places for me to go, suggesting online meetings to go to. And I was like, yeah. And I even went to a few stoned.
Right.
And you know, it was just such a flashback. I mean, I'm actually equating it now, but it was such a flashback to like wanting to jump in front of the gold line.
Right. Yeah.
And I guess I was just at that kind of bottom.
Yeah.
And I started going back to meetings.
And were they online at that point, or were they?
They were
back in
online.
person?
Yeah, they were just starting to open up in places, and I was actually really scared about like going to places because what was it? It was like 2 years of quarantine, right?
Yeah.
So I'm living inside my place for 2 years.
Right.
You know, I work in my field, and I'm doing all post stuff, so it's
Right.
all just at home.
Yeah.
I don't know how to I don't know how other people are going to be out there in the world, and I'm such a I got to be there for you kind of guy that I can't imagine like doing anything for me.
Right.
But yeah, I started going to meetings and people were nice. And I also found, and the most simple revelation until, after you figure it out, if you're honest, people treat you honestly. Because even when I was my first run of sobriety, I just wanted you to like me. I just, I kind of wanted a little bit of the like, I'll give you nice attention because you're so quirky and interesting, but who are you? It doesn't matter who I am. You think I'm quirky and interesting. Let's just roll with that.
Yeah.
And I would just tell people how much I was like hurting or like how angry I was at this thing or like, I feel like a victim here or whatever. And people would talk to me and they wouldn't say like, oh, pat you on the back thing, which is what I thought I wanted. Honestly, I just want people to respect me. And I never really felt that. I grew up this, lackey to two deaf people. I grew up feeling completely like I don't fit in with anyone. So I need to like be the best person I could be there. I have the most wonderful black scent that I have to push down.
Right.
And a lot of that, I mean, it's real, but like a lot of that was like me, like if I talk this way, they'll like me better.
Sure.
Muslim Student Association, they were all very nice to me, but like I just wanted to say what they wanted to hear so they wouldn't not like me.
Right.
Everything's a job interview to me. I just want you to hire me and like make me your friend.
I relate.
So I got a little more honest. I'm not perfectly honest, but like I'm more honest than before. And it's so crazy. People don't talk to you like you're a performer.
Huh.
They talk to you like you're Adam.
Right.
Yeah. That Mel Gibson story, I've loved telling that story for such a long time. It's a true story, but it also lets me like perform.
Yeah. Sure.
And if I ever meet him again, I know I owe him an amends.
Yeah.
I was rude. And God,
so how long have you been sober now?
I'm a little over 6 months right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I had at one point 12 years.
Right.
But a lot of that was, I don't know, there's a big difference between being sober and being not using.
Yeah.
So sober is the term that I give myself now. I'll use sober, in a pinch in a sentence, but I was dry.
Yeah.
I was dry for a solid 12 years, give or take a couple pink mountains working on stuff with people.
During those 12 years, did you continue? How did your career evolve? I guess is one thing I'm curious about.
It fucking plateaued, and a lot of times it just devolved.
Right.
I've never, until the last 6 months, I've never done anything beyond like not using to think that's an improvement, but it's not an improvement. Like if you're a diabetic and you're just trying to make sure that you're sugar free and you don't use insulin or whatever else they recommend, you're not doing anything except, suffering.
Right.
Yeah, I would still look for the job to like feel better about myself. And I had some fun jobs. I got to work with Snoop Dogg and I gave myself a big pat on the back for not getting high with Snoop Dogg. And, a few fun things like that. I was sent across the country a few times on different, adventure shows, and that was wonderful. But then those things end and you realize that you're basically substituting one drug for the drug of like acceptance. And when you freelance and you go from television show to television show, that drug's going to end. You're going to get cut off at some point, and you feel really empty.
Yeah.
And that was it. Like where I sat on the couch for like 2 years, just like doing weed, and looking for something to like make meaning. I was doing the same thing with like work,
right?
Or I would do the same thing with like girls. I found this girl and she's great, and then I would find myself still looking for like another girl while I'm with one girl.
With the girl that you're into.
Yeah,
supposedly.
there was no. I wasn't satisfied with myself. I wasn't even looking to be satisfied.
How are things different now?
Well, I'm attempting to basically be as honest as possible. This podcast is being honest. I could definitely polish up my story a little. I was a shitty friend.
Right.
I was a shitty worker. I was a shitty boyfriend. And I thought I was great. I thought like I made it through this whole like deaf, like rough childhood, had to steal to eat, had to like be there and be like the parent for these two people. I had to raise my own little brother. And then one day I find out about this kid. And by the way, an addendum to that, I tracked down baby's mama 7 years later. And she lets me know that it's actually Dennis, the tow truck driver's kid.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. But
Wow,
you know,
thanks for sharing that because I would have forgotten to follow up on that,
Yeah.
which would have been a real crime.
Yeah,
That's amazing. So you don't have some
I don't have
child out there that
which-
you're aware of.
which was a little bit of a letdown actually,
Yeah,
because
kind of.
yeah, you kind of hope, and like, you know, once that kid was born, because I grew up as this whole person, like I had to be perfect in those ways. I set up a savings account for this kid. You know, I did all because I knew one day this kid might be curious
Come
about
find
mom
you.
and dad.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, anyways, the day I found that out, I was also angry, but I also bought myself a nice laptop.
Nice.
But yeah, like, you know, and I don't remember what I was saying. Anyways, that was the addendum to the
That's
the kid
wild.
thing.
That's
Yeah.
wild.
I guess what I was trying to say before was like, I wasn't doing anything to like be myself. I was doing everything I could to be someone who you would like.
Right.
I would love to go on. I've done a few interviews before and stuff like that, and I've just, you know, just talked to people, and like I just want you to smile and like me.
Sure.
I just want you to think how wonderful this guy is, so esteemable,
Right.
without any esteemable actions.
Right.
I feel today I'm a little more honest about like all the shit I've done, and I don't think of myself as esteemable without actually doing esteemable things. Now I've done esteemable things.
Yeah.
Those I could hang my hat on.
Sure.
But just existing isn't esteemable. Just existing is existing.
And what about rapping?
Oh man.
Can you still rap?
I mean, I could probably drop a rhyme or two, but I don't really try anymore. What happened actually is during that whole rap time, the few times that I did like try to get back into it, I had this one guy who I looked up to him a bit, and he gave me one of those like backhanded compliments where he's like, "You should really think about singing." And I know my voice. I am no singer.
Right.
And I think, you know, I got some nasal to this
Yeah.
voice. And it really, you know, I was a guy who liked to battle. I like
Right.
to like
Yeah.
look at you and find the things I could pick apart about you and
Right.
do it in rhyme form. And I was really good at it. I loved like the Rap Olympics and going out onto like the curb in front of like Project Load, Chaos Network, and doing shit out there. But once you lose that confidence, it's really hard to like
Sure.
have it still. And I knew I was the little white boy. I fancied myself like Woody Harrelson in White Men Can't Jump.
Right.
You know, I loved coming in and being that little nerdy looking guy who all of a sudden just dropped like 8 bars on you that were fucking freestyle about like how bad your hair and teeth
Right.
are.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? Still music obsessed. I'm sure that was all the Def thing. I own probably 5,000, 6,000 records at this point.
Right.
At other points, I bought out entire store stocks. I can tell you about Belgian fusion jazz of the late 70s. Really, you know,
Right.
thoroughly, you know, Japanese, whatever soul of the early 70s. I know these subgenres so well. I've worked in many record stores. All social media that I have now is just about obscure records. I'm
Sure.
just that guy. And I love being the guy that maybe can find you a sample.
And what do you do though with that sort of creative energy now?
I've thought about writing out the story. Like,
Yeah.
while I've told you the story and while people have seen CODA,
Yeah.
and CODA is such a heartwarming story, that is not the story that I lived. That is not
Yeah.
the story that a lot of CODAs I know have
Yeah.
lived.
Right.
It's rough. You
Yeah.
know, I'm sure I can only speak for my parents and those that I've met, but not every parent has a heart of gold and stays silent the entire movie only to say I love you before they watch you go off to college in your
Right.
car. You
Right.
know, no, that's not the story. Like, there is a lot of responsibility. I've actually gone on Reddit. There's a CODA subreddit there, and I asked people, have you guys ever felt this kind of pressure? And I watched that thing go unanswered for like a month, and then all of a sudden there were so many people that chimed
Right.
in on it. I was like, fuck, okay, so it's
Yeah.
not
just
this.
me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about writing that story. I'm a little scared to write that story because I feel like if you say anything negative about a person and they're handicapped, it tends to get like looked down at. But
Right.
if you write your life, you write your life.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you should. I think that'd
Yeah.
be really cool. So, I mean, obviously, I heard just a tiny bit of it at a meeting, and I was like, oh, I want to hear more. So,
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not alone.
Yeah, telling people about like, you know what, I think I told you my dad would get pulled over and like all of a sudden he was really deaf and point to his ear and all stuff like that had anything to do with him driving down the road going 10 miles over the 20 miles over the speed limit. You know, that thing played a lot. I played deaf at like Magic Mountain Deaf Day to get in cheaper
Oh,
or whatever.
wow,
There's
right.
shit like that. You know, there's hustles and there's just as dishonest, and I shouldn't even say dishonest. There's just as realistic a human personality within someone with a handicap. Of
course.
without.
Yeah. And I think it's very hard for normal people to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Adam, thanks so much for coming in. It was great. Really just as good as I hoped.
My pleasure. I'm happy I got to talk with you.
Awesome. Just a brief note to say that while we do try to protect the anonymity of everybody on this podcast, I chose to include the anecdote about Mel because he has been very public about his involvement in 12-step programs to help his recovery. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.